massive police raid. 20 million pounds in drugs, 5 tons of weapons, all seized from a luxury London hotel housing migrants. At least, that's what the headlines claimed. But when the police started digging into what's actually happening inside these hotels, they uncovered something far more shocking than any single raid could ever reveal. Behind the luxury facade, the scenes unfolding across London's most expensive neighborhoods would seem impossible just a few years ago. Picture this: the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf, where rooms typically cost between £200 and £400 per night, has been transformed into something entirely different. 4-poster beds, hot buffets with unlimited servings, smart televisions in every room, and taxpayer-funded Uber rides for trips as trivial as visiting nearby shops. This isn't a vacation resort, though it certainly looks like one from the outside.
I work for a local charity here on the Isle of Dogs, and I have done for 42 years, okay? We serve over 1,000 people a week in the food bank, and the majority of those are working, okay? So these people are working, and they still can't afford to come in here. But one night for an anniversary, or for a birthday, they can't afford to do that.
The reality behind these opulent setups reveals something far more troubling than luxury accommodations. Since 2022, the UK Home Office has contracted over 300 hotels nationwide to house asylum seekers, with daily costs exceeding £8 million and totaling billions yearly. The contracts often go to private firms like Serco, creating what critics describe as a parallel hospitality industry, funded entirely by British taxpayers, while ordinary citizens struggle to afford basic necessities. But luxury amenities are just the surface of a much deeper problem that's emerged within these facilities. Undercover reporting has documented scenes that would shock most Britons: cocaine residue in rooms, rolled 50-pound notes used for snorting, weed grinders scattered on tables, and bank cards left behind. Yet despite these blatant signs of drug activity, no arrests occurred, no evictions were processed, and no seizures took place. Staff members at these hotels have reportedly stopped calling police altogether, driven by fear, and what insiders describe as a zero consequences policy that's allowed criminal activity to flourish unchecked. The scale of what's happening becomes clearer when you examine specific locations. Take the Copthorne Hotel in West Sussex, where room inspections became routine exercises in discovering evidence of drug use and dealing, cannabis paraphernalia, traces of Class A substances, and all the tools of a small-scale distribution operation were found repeatedly, yet the cycle continued without intervention. Hotel staff, caught between their duties and genuine safety concerns, found themselves in an impossible position where reporting could potentially put their own well-being at risk. Social media footage from the Britannia Hotel has shown migrants allegedly brandishing firearms and dealing drugs, with posts claiming daily police call-outs that result in no meaningful action. One particularly alarming post from August 2025 described people being transported into these facilities ready to deal drugs and terrorize the streets, painting a picture of organized criminal activity operating with apparent impunity within taxpayer-funded accommodations. The financial implications alone should raise eyebrows across Britain. The National Audit Office reported in 2025 that the UK spends between £6 and £8 billion yearly on asylum hotel accommodations, a figure that dwarfs spending on numerous other public services. Meanwhile, working families who contribute to this system through their taxes find themselves unable to afford a single night in hotels that have become permanent residences for those who entered the country without documentation or authorization. This explosive combination of luxury accommodations, rampant drug activity, and genuine community fear has created powder keg situations across London and beyond. The Thistle Hotel in Park Lane, where rooms typically exceed £1,000 per night, became another Serco-managed facility for migrant housing, further straining the relationship between authorities and local residents who watch their neighborhoods transform virtually overnight without consultation or democratic input. But the drug situation extends far beyond individual hotel rooms. In May 2025, an Egyptian smuggler housed in London taxpayer accommodation orchestrated a £12 million people trafficking ring from Libya involving 4,000 migrants, and highlighting how these hotels have become operational bases for organized crime networks that span continents. violence. This wasn't an isolated case of someone taking advantage of the system. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise run from within facilities meant to provide temporary humanitarian shelter. The National Crime Agency reported seizing 620 kilograms of Class A drugs in operations dismantling networks that used migrant routes and accommodations as cover for their operations. These aren't small-time dealers caught with personal use quantities. These are industrial-scale trafficking operations worth millions of pounds, often connected to vulnerable arrivals who find themselves exploited by criminal gangs the moment they set foot on British soil. Whistleblowers who've worked inside these facilities describe them as racketeering hubs, where migrants arrive without identification but quickly receive phones that connect them to overseas crime networks. Daily food fights break out in dining areas. Assaults on women go unreported and unpunished, and staff members admit they're too afraid to take action or even document what they witness. One Airbnb host reported in 2025 that 20 migrant men trashed her property while hosting underage girls, yet her complaints to police were dismissed without investigation, exemplifying a pattern of enforcement failure that's become all too common. The Home Office announced penalties in July 2025 for asylum seekers refusing transfers from hotels to cheaper barrack-style sites, aiming to cut costs amid growing public outrage over spending. However, this policy shift sparked immediate fears of unrest and resistance, with concerns that forced relocations could trigger violence, similar to what's already been witnessed at protest sites across the country. Despite these announced changes, hotel usage has persisted, with prime London properties continuing to serve as long-term migrant housing, while the government struggles to find viable alternatives. The situation in East London, estates near migrant hotspots, saw Met Police crackdowns that netted £20,000 in drugs and £2,300 in cash during 2023 operations targeting cuckooing, where gangs exploit vulnerable housing and residents. These operations revealed how criminal networks have woven themselves into the fabric of communities surrounding migrant accommodations, using both the hotels and nearby properties as nodes in distribution networks that serve customers across London and beyond. What makes this situation particularly explosive is the disconnect between what's happening on the ground and how authorities respond. Police visit these hotels regularly, responding to reports of violence, drug dealing, sexual assaults, and various other crimes, yet the pattern remains consistent. Arrivals, incidents, police call-outs, and then nothing. No deportations follow serious criminal convictions. No systemic changes address the underlying problems, and the same facilities continue operating under the same conditions that created the problems in the first place. The justification often cited involves human rights appeals that cost millions in continued housing, while serious offenders remain in Britain rather than being returned to their countries of origin. The hotels themselves have become flashpoints for broader tensions about immigration policy, resource allocation, and public safety. When hotel owner John Mappin of Camelot Castle rejected a £20 million government offer to house arrivals in his high-end facility, calling it absurd to use luxury accommodations for this purpose, he articulated what many Britons were thinking but felt unable to say publicly. Social media erupted with posts highlighting how migrants were being shuttled from Canary Wharf's Britannia to £300,000 luxury apartments in Chelmsford, fueling widespread outrage over resource allocation during a cost-of-living crisis affecting millions of working families. The criminal element operating within and around these hotels has created what some describe as no-go zones, where normal rules of law and order seem suspended. Daily assaults, regular drug dealing, weapons possession, and organized criminal activity continue largely unchecked, creating environments that bear little resemblance to the humanitarian shelters they were supposedly designed to be. Instead, they've become incubators for exactly the kind of criminal behavior that communities feared would follow, from housing large numbers of undocumented individuals without proper vetting, oversight, or consequences for misconduct. When communities push back, The frustration building in communities across London finally reached its breaking point during the summer and autumn of 2025. What started as quiet grumbling about policy decisions erupted into widespread protests that would challenge police forces already stretched thin by budget cuts and reduced manpower. The scenes that unfolded would expose deep divisions about how Britain handles immigration, who gets protected when tensions rise, and whether ordinary citizens still have any voice in decisions affecting their neighborhoods.
People are struggling now, aren't they?
People are really struggling. You have a lifeboat that holds 300 people, that has 300 supplies, and you put 600 in it, it will sink. And that is what's happening here.
The Britannia Hotel at Canary Wharf became ground zero for confrontations between protesters and police during August and September 2025. These weren't small gatherings of a few dozen people. These were crowds numbering in the hundreds who showed up day after day, driven by what they described as genuine fear for their families' safety and fury at being excluded from decisions that fundamentally altered their communities. 6 arrests occurred during these protests for drugs, assault, and public order breaches, but the underlying tensions continued simmering long after police cleared the streets each evening. A particularly disturbing incident saw a woman with a meat cleaver attempt to breach the Britannia Hotel, later admitting to affray charges after being subdued by officers. While this individual's actions clearly crossed legal lines, her case became emblematic of the desperation some residents felt as their neighborhoods transformed without their consent or input. The fact that someone would resort to such extreme measures spoke volumes about the depth of community anger, building beneath the surface of what authorities had hoped would be orderly policy implementation. The protests spread rapidly. At the Crown Plaza in West London, masked men attempted to force entry, leading to 5 arrests as police struggled to maintain order between protesters and hotel security. These weren't coordinated far-right groups arriving from across the country. Many participants were local residents who'd lived in these areas for decades and watched their communities change in ways they neither requested nor supported. The mask wearing suggested awareness that expressing opposition to current migration policies could result in social and professional consequences, adding another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. July through August 2025 saw nationwide unrest erupt at sites, including Epping, Bristol, and Liverpool, with protesters hurling rocks, eggs, and engaging in physical scuffles with police and counter-demonstrators. Over 20 terrorism-related arrests followed attacks on hotels as authorities struggled to distinguish between legitimate community concerns and criminal behavior designed to intimidate vulnerable populations. The disinformation campaigns surrounding these protests, including false claims about child stabbings by migrants, added fuel to fires already burning across England's towns and cities. The Epping Hotel incident became particularly charged after a migrant's alleged assault on a local girl prompted clashes between residents and police. The victim's father publicly accused Labour of policy failures that endangered his daughter and other children, articulating fears that had been building in communities, watching migrant populations grow rapidly without corresponding increases in policing or safeguarding resources. His emotional testimony resonated across social media, shared thousands of times by people who saw their own concerns reflected in his family's trauma.
These guys here, I have never seen so many police on the Isle of Dogs in one hit. Never.
Why do you think there's so many police? I've counted 12
Because
vans on the way
they fear
down.
what is happening to Epping, right? That's what they fear. These people here are families, their husbands and wives, and they've got no intentions of causing any aggravation at all.
But while large protests captured headlines, quieter confrontations revealed troubling patterns in how different groups were treated by authorities. In Chichester, during August 2025, Sussex police arrested a local man by choking him during a demonstration outside a migrant hotel, later releasing him due to mistaken identity. Video footage showed the officer's aggressive grab and restraint technique, sparking immediate accusations of two-tier policing, where British citizens protesting receive harsher treatment than migrants committing actual crimes. The visceral nature of the footage, showing a man being physically dominated by police for simply standing with other protesters, became a rallying point for those arguing that authorities had lost perspective on who actually posed threats to public order. At Epping, officers threatened protesters with pepper spray outside a migrant hotel, with tensions escalating to physical scuffles. Locals reported feeling under siege by both migrants and police, describing a real situation where they feared expressing concerns about their own neighborhoods. Video showed baton use against unarmed demonstrators who appeared to be standing their ground rather than advancing aggressively, raising questions about proportionality and police responses to what were largely static protests. The police response strategy itself became controversial. A December 2024 report criticized forces for delaying a national mobilization plan by 3 days during summer riots, allowing anti-immigrant violence to spread more widely than it might have with faster coordination. Yet this same slow response contrasted sharply with rapid deployments to protect migrant hotels from protesters, creating perceptions that authorities prioritized protecting new arrivals over addressing community concerns or preventing violence against British citizens. The officer numbers had dropped dramatically from 67,785 in 2023 to 58,002 by July 2025, straining responses to unrest across multiple locations simultaneously. Police found themselves caught between political pressures to maintain order, community anger about policies they didn't create, and practical limitations on how many officers could be deployed to emerging flashpoints. The result was a patchwork response that satisfied nobody and often escalated rather than diffused tensions at protest sites. Parliament held debates specifically about migrant crimes in asylum hotels, citing cases like a Sudanese man's rape conviction and multiple assaults by hotel residents on staff and community members. MPs from constituencies affected by hotel conversions described constituent communications filled with fear and frustration, detailing how neighborhoods had changed seemingly overnight with no democratic input or consultation. These parliamentary sessions revealed the disconnect between Westminster policymaking and street-level realities in communities actually hosting these facilities. Social media monitoring became another flashpoint. A national police unit was launched in July 2025, specifically to scan platforms for anti-migrant disorder signs, using AI and dedicated officers to preempt unrest before it manifested physically. This drew immediate backlash from civil liberties advocates and ordinary citizens who saw it as thought policing designed to suppress legitimate criticism of government policies. The optics were particularly damaging. While hotel crimes went unpunished, police resources were being devoted to monitoring British citizens' social media posts about immigration issues. One particularly viral post claimed a migrant in police uniform had effectively banned protests against illegal immigration, though the actual circumstances were more nuanced. Regardless of the specific details, the post's widespread sharing and engagement numbers revealed how deeply trust in policing had eroded among significant portions of the British public. When people believe their own police force has been co-opted to enforce policies against citizens' interests, the social contract underlying law enforcement begins fraying in dangerous ways. A former hotel manager's arrest for criticizing migrant crime online was labeled state intimidation by supporters who saw it as confirmation that authorities were more interested in suppressing dissent than addressing the underlying problems driving that dissent. Meanwhile, a neighbor who reported a rail attacker's violent ambush saw no police follow-up, creating stark contrasts between how quickly police responded to online criticism versus actual violent crimes occurring in communities. The September 13, 2025 Unite the Kingdom rally brought over 110,000 far-right protesters to central London, resulting in violent clashes where police faced bottles, fireworks, and physical assaults. 26 officers were injured, 4 seriously, leading to 124 arrests after baton charges and water cannon deployment. The Metropolitan Police described facing unprecedented aggression, with videos showing protesters overwhelming police lines near migrant hotels in coordinated pushes that required massive reinforcement deployments to contain. A Bristol march in early October saw around 100 demonstrators clash with counter-protesters and Avon and Somerset police, hurling bricks and abuse that left 8 arrested for a fray and 2 officers concussed by thrown objects. The march had been organized via social media, echoing tactics used in earlier Epping unrest, demonstrating how quickly protests could be mobilized when community anger reached critical mass. Nationwide asylum hotel demonstrations on August 23rd spread to 15 sites, including Rotherham and Knowsley, where crowds pelted police with eggs and fireworks in coordinated actions, suggesting significant organizational capacity among protest movements. In one particularly violent melee, a constable was dragged to to the ground by protesters, leading to 32 arrests total as forces deployed riot gear amid genuine fears that 2024's riots might repeat themselves on an even larger scale. Yet for all the focus on protester violence, incidents involving migrants attacking communities received less consistent media coverage and police response. In Southampton during August, armed migrants from a hotel attempted to breach a fence to attack anti-hotel protesters, hurling objects at crowds and police. Officers reportedly stood by without immediate intervention, per eyewitness videos that circulated widely on social media. This occurred during a weekend that saw an Afghan national charged with raping a 12-year-old and a Sudanese man for attempting to kidnap a 10-year-old, creating a volatile situation where communities felt simultaneously threatened by crime and unprotected by authorities. The perception of two-tier policing solidified through countless individual incidents that, taken together, painted a picture of enforcement disparities that couldn't be easily explained away. When protesters faced immediate arrest for verbal confrontations, while migrants committing assaults received warnings or releases without charges, communities saw a justice system that had fundamentally lost its way. Whether these perceptions accurately reflected systemic policy or resulted from confirmation bias and selective attention mattered less than the reality that large numbers of British citizens no longer trusted their police forces to enforce laws equally. Statistics showing migrants 34% more likely to be arrested than UK nationals were often cited by those arguing no bias existed, pointing to demographic factors like younger average age and higher male percentages in migrant populations. However, these same statistics showed that enforcement visits by immigration enforcement rose 38% in 2024 through 2025, conducting over 5,400 visits, leading to 3,930 arrests for illegal working, suggesting authorities were actively pursuing migrant-related enforcement, even as hotel crimes went largely unpunished. The online discourse revealed deep polarization. Reddit threads demanded deportation for migrant criminals, with users calling it silly to release offenders who'd assaulted female police officers. The social media monitoring unit sparked privacy fears, with comments describing it as police used against British people to defend illegal immigrants. Discussions about asylum seekers harassing women drew blame for cultural issues and frustration about lax asylum grants despite sex crime accusations. The breaking point. The autumn of 2025 brought a wave of incidents that would crystallize every fear communities had articulated since the hotel conversions began. These weren't abstract policy debates or statistical discussions about crime rates. These were horrific acts of violence committed against ordinary people trying to live their lives, often by individuals who should never have been in Britain at all. The cases that emerged during October and November painted a portrait of a system that had completely lost control, where the gaps between policy and reality had widened into chasms that swallowed innocent victims. On October 28th, an Afghan refugee was arrested after a brutal street attack in Uxbridge that killed a dog walker and injured 2 others in West London. Officers responding to screams had to taser the suspect after he resisted arrest, sustaining minor injuries from a flung knife. The incident was captured on multiple doorbell cameras, showing a scene of chaotic violence that residents described as their worst nightmare coming true. The Afghan had arrived via small boat in 2023 and remained under asylum review despite the deadly attack, raising questions about why he hadn't been detained or removed during the review process. That same day in Bournemouth, 2 asylum seekers from a coastal migrant hotel were jailed after chasing staff with knives over what they claimed was unsatisfactory food. The dispute escalated into a brawl, requiring police intervention, with officers using batons to subdue the pair who spat at and kicked responders. One constable required stitches for a leg wound sustained during the melee. Dorset police linked this to over 150 hotel-related charges filed in 2025 alone, describing conditions as daily chaos in taxpayer-funded sites where violence had become normalized rather than exceptional. October 24th saw a Sudanese asylum seeker convicted of stabbing a female hotel worker to death at a Walsall railway station following a prior altercation at the migrant accommodation. During his arrest, arrest, he headbutted 2 officers, fracturing one's nose, with body cam footage showing a prolonged, violent struggle before tasers finally subdued him. The case became part of a parliamentary probe into hotel safety, revealing that the killer had assaulted staff members weeks earlier without facing deportation or even removal from the facility, where he'd already demonstrated violent tendencies. In Derby, on October 30th, a Somali small boat migrant received a life sentence for the unprovoked murder of a bank customer whom he stabbed while she waited in a queue. The subsequent police pursuit involved a high-speed chase ending when the suspect rammed a patrol car, then bit an officer's arm during the arrest process. Derbyshire Constabulary noted this represented the 3rd migrant-linked fatal stabbing in the Midlands that month alone, occurring amid 20% higher response times as stretched resources struggled to cover expanding areas of concern. Maidstone saw an Afghan asylum seeker convicted on October 29th of sexually assaulting 2 women at their homes while illegally delivering food without work authorization. When police arrested him following a tip-off, he resisted by elbowing an officer in the ribs, requiring a knee-strike takedown captured on body cam footage. Kent police tied this to broader predatory patterns emerging in asylum dispersal areas where vulnerable individuals were being targeted by those who'd been granted freedom of movement despite having no legal right to work or remain in Britain. Late October brought a wave of rape convictions that shocked even hardened observers. A failed Egyptian asylum seeker's double rape conviction near Charing Cross Station on October 30th involved him resisting arrest by kicking multiple officers. Another Egyptian received sentencing for a nightclub alleyway assault in York on October 31st after attempting to flee custody. In Cardiff, a Syrian asylum seeker was jailed for strangling and assaulting a woman under a bridge on October 31st, headbutting police during his capture in an attack that left the victim traumatized and community members questioning why someone with his background had been granted unsupervised freedom. These cases followed a September policy shift, mandating ethnicity disclosures for criminal suspects in response to accusations that authorities were hiding migrant involvement in crimes to counter what they termed far-right misinformation. The data revealed that migrants were involved in 28% of sexual offenses during that quarter, a figure that stunned many observers and validated concerns that had been dismissed as racist fear-mongering just months earlier. November 3rd brought investigation into a knife attack on a commuter train in southeast England, with British Transport Police probing links to a prior migrant-related stabbing of a 14-year-old. The suspect, an undocumented Algerian, slashed at pursuing officers before being pinned, leaving one with a hand laceration. Early forensics suggested connections to smuggling networks, with eyewitnesses describing certain carriages as effectively no-go zones where normal passengers avoided sitting due to aggressive behavior from groups of young men. Direct violence against police continued escalating. The Manchester airport assault in July 2024 saw 4 men of Pakistani heritage wanted for serious offenses, including murder, attack officers while attempting to flee the country. One female officer suffered a broken nose after being punched, with video footage showing the group overpowering officers and nearly seizing their weapons before tasers brought them under control. Police later confirmed the men were illegal entrants, evading serious charges, raising questions about how they'd remained in Britain long enough to attempt airport escape. In Ilford, during August 2024, an undocumented migrant armed with a large knife resisted arrest, with his associates intervening when police tried to subdue him. A female officer was injured in the resulting melee, with bystander footage capturing chaos as the group surrounded officers before tasers were finally deployed. This occurred amid broader unrest following Southport stabbings that police acknowledged had intensified migration-related fears across London's boroughs. Bournemouth saw migrants housed in local hotels clash with each other and police on the seafront during June and July 2025, throwing missiles that injured 5 officers. An 18-year-old faced arrest for assault, affray, and attacking emergency workers. Dorset police reported 116 charges against migrants from just 3 hotels in 2025, including assaults on staff and public disorder that had become so routine it barely warranted local news coverage unless injuries were particularly severe. Perhaps most disturbing was a November 2025 incident where an asylum seeker on a bus to a migrant hotel punched and spat at an officer who'd woken him during a routine check. The assault, captured on body cam, led to charges of attacking an emergency worker. Dorset police characterized characterized it as emblematic of rising hotel-related disorder where basic interactions between authorities and residents could explode into violence without warning or apparent provocation. The small boat arrivals continued unabated, exceeding 30,000 by October 2025, with fatalities rising due to increasingly dangerous smuggling tactics as criminal networks packed more people into inadequate vessels. The National Crime Agency warned that organized immigration crime was driving much of the violence seen in and around migrant accommodations, with smuggling gangs maintaining control over arrivals even after they reached British soil through debt bondage and threats against family members back home. Manchester's Piccadilly Gardens became a symbol of how dramatically some areas had changed. Post-riot footage from November showed police as the only English presence amid migrant-led disorder, with officers outnumbered and retreating from confrontations they couldn't safely manage. Commentators described it as a hellscape of unchecked violence, where normal rules of public behavior had completely broken down, creating spaces that felt foreign to longtime residents who remembered when the same locations had been safe family destinations. Reddit discussions exploded with these October cases. Users in political forums demanded deportations for all migrant criminals, with some calculating that over 15 major crimes had occurred in October alone, sparking 1,200 upvotes and furious debates about whether the system could even be salvaged at this point. One thread about mistaken prison releases of 2 migrants in late October garnered particular attention, with users decrying failed safeguards that endangered public safety through sheer administrative incompetence. The Epping sex offenders reciting in London prompted 200 comments about systematic failures that allowed dangerous individuals to disappear into Britain's urban centers. Users shared personal stories of feeling unsafe in neighborhoods they'd lived in for decades, describing how the character of entire districts had shifted as migrant populations concentrated in specific areas without corresponding increases in policing or social services to manage the transition. The broader sentiment coalesced around what users termed two-tier justice, where swift arrests followed protests, while migrant offenders received seemingly endless chances. Debates on ethnicity disclosures raged between those praising transparency and others fearing the data would stoke riots by confirming what critics had been saying all along about disproportionate migrant crime rates. Twitter activity showed similar patterns, amplified by engagement algorithms that pushed controversial content to wider audiences. MPs like Lee Anderson compiled daily lists of convictions that amassed 18,000 likes and spawned thousands of replies demanding immediate policy changes. The Uxbridge stabbing trended with arrest videos reaching 10,000 views, with commentators describing Britain as becoming unlivable for ordinary families trying to raise children in safety. The bus assault clips recirculated throughout November, often with sarcastic commentary about police priorities that devoted resources to monitoring social media criticism, while officers on the ground faced physical attacks for doing routine checks. Semantic analysis showed migrant crime wave becoming one of the most searched terms related to UK news, with 40% of replies urging comprehensive reform that went far beyond current government proposals. What emerged from these horrific months was a picture of systems failing at every level simultaneously, vetting processes that should have identified dangerous individuals before granting them freedom of movement, enforcement mechanisms that should have removed criminals after their first offenses rather than allowing them to accumulate victims, communication breakdowns between agencies that left convicted offenders in asylum accommodations where they could reoffend, and perhaps most critically, a political establishment that seemed more concerned with managing optics than addressing fundamental problems that were destroying community cohesion across Britain's towns and cities. The Home Office data showing only 94 small boat deportations year to date, despite thousands of criminal convictions, highlighted enforcement backlogs that meant even the worst offenders often remained in Britain for years, while appeals wound through overloaded legal systems. Meanwhile, communities bore the costs of these delays through crime, fear, and the gradual erosion of social trust that had taken generations to build. The allegations that sparked interest in this investigation may have proven unfounded in their specific details. No credible evidence supports claims of a single massive raid yielding £20 million in drugs and 5 tons of weapons from a London hotel. However, the real story that emerged from examining what actually has been happening in these facilities proves far more more complex and troubling than any single sensational claim could capture. It's a story of policy failure on multiple levels, of communities abandoned by authorities they once trusted, of vulnerable people exploited by criminal networks, and of a justice system struggling to function under pressures it was never designed to handle. These are the uncomfortable truths that Britain must confront if it hopes to restore the basic social contract between government and governed that appears to be fraying with each new headline announcing another preventable tragedy.